Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we're in the book of Hosea, chapter 6. So let's kind of get right in it. Hosea chapter 6. God's warning the nation of Israel, meaning the northern kingdoms, of the coming judgment. Also, he's laying out their sins. I think that's important to understand because whenever I hear people complain about God, criticize God, I never hear them do it truthfully. For example, if you listen to, even here on YouTube, you see that there is, oddly enough, a lot of atheists who try to take apart Christianity, or people who say, I'm no longer a Christian. I'm no longer a Christian. And one of the things that you will find when they say, I'm no longer a Christian, that they never talk about the character of God. They never say, I'm not following God because, he's just, he's a typical man, he's a brute, he's that, he's unkind. Now, what they do accuse him when they say he's unkind or unjust, they never talk about this when God lays out the sin of the people. And just so, to be clear, why can God do as he please? Because first and foremost, all of this is God. He created us and the world and all things in it. So he could set the rules. So when he says this is right and this is wrong, he can do so because God himself is the ruler over everything, the creator over everything. So verse 6 says, come, let us return to the Lord. This is verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1 says, come, let us return to the Lord. Now let's, right here, when you don't obey that. So the biggest question about judgment is, why aren't you returning to the Lord? Now, since you're not returning to the Lord, here are the consequences for not returning to the Lord. So the biggest question is, why aren't you returning to the Lord? He says, come, let us return to the Lord. For he has torn us, he will heal us, he has wounded us, he will bind up our wounds. Okay? So the question is, if this is not happening, why? So the question is, why aren't you returning to the Lord? Verse 2 says, he will revive us after 2 days, and on the third day he will raise us up so we can live in his presence. Now, this verse 2 here had been sorely misused in prophecy. So when you look at it, it says he will revive us after 2 days, and then on the third day he will rise us up. Now, people have interpreted this as sort of a timetable, a time clock. Now, to get that one part from Peter, so let me see if I can go to Peter, find this right quick. So the thing goes that a day in the sight of God is like a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. Let me see if I can go through this. I'm going to try to go through this. Now, the problem with that interpretation, however, is that if you only go by that, okay, now, if you say that a day, it's in chapter 2 or 3, I think it is. I think it's chapter 2. Yeah, 2 Peter chapter 2, or the 3. I'll get it. Yeah, here it is. chapter 3. It's 2 Peter chapter 3. Look at verse 8. He says, "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day." Right? Now, the reason why he said this is because verse 9, "The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness." Now, so they use this to try to say then, let's go back to in chapter 2, they try to use this to say that after he will revive us after 2 days, and on the third day he will rise us up. So they said, well, a day equals 1,000 years. So if a day equals 1,000 years, then every 1,000 years to God is a day. So Jesus has been gone for 2,000 years. So that meant that's 2 days. So he says he will revive us after 2 days, and on the third day he will raise us up. So if you want to use this to interpret Peter and kind of put them together, and then say, now it's been 2,000 years, thus 2 days, Jesus is coming. Now, if you kind of go back to Peter here, you go back to Peter and he says, "But do not overlook this fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day." Could we not reverse it? So could that not mean that a day, 1 day now is 1,000 years? So that meant 2,000 years ago, after 2 days, would have been fulfilled? Notice what he says here: 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. In other words, there's no passage of time with God. That's all that he's saying here. So if we want to look at it from this perspective now, it says he will revive us after 2 days. So now if you want to say that this is referring to 1,000 years or 2,000 years, from what perspective? In other words, when do you start the clock for this? Now here's my point. It's possible, right, that this could be referring to 1,000-year period of time. All right. In other words, he says he will revive us after 2 days. Okay. Now, first of all, he will revive whom? Or who? Who will he revive? Well, he's talking about Israel here. Specifically, the northern kingdoms. Not Judah. Now, watch this. I'm just showing you. So then if he says, after 2 days, he will revive us. If the 2 days refer to 1,000 years, and 2,000 years has passed, so we know that it's at least been that. So then he says, in the third day he'll rise us up. Could we interpret this as the 2,000-year church age, and then thus the third day being the millennial reign, which is about 1,000 years? Now watch this. It's possible. It's possible. But then when do you start the clock for this to happen? When do you start the clock for this to happen? Okay, so that's where the problem is by trying to say, because you're starting the clock when Jesus comes. That's not what this says right here. This is not saying that the prophetic clock, starts when Jesus came. So again, when does this clock start? And by the way, prophetically, we do have some time clock. There is a prophetic time clock that started. Daniel said during the time of Cyprus, the Persian Medes, when he gave the order to restore the kingdom, to restore Jerusalem, which happened in the book of Nehemiah, in Ezra's time. So when that order was it was issued to build the wall, to restore the wall, there was a prophetic time clock that began. But my point is, we can locate that. We can locate then how long certain prophecies would happen. So my point is, if you're going to use this as a timetable, and some do, when does this begin? When do you start the clock on these 2 days? Okay, because most of the time they started when Jesus. Okay, when Jesus day. But that's not what he's talking about here. All right, so let's get back to it. All right. We'll come back to this, so when we do, we may come back to this again when we get into the book of Daniel, because that Daniel prophecy gives us some timelines, okay, some prophetic timelines. So verse 2 says, he will revive us after 2 days, and on the 3rd day he will raise us up so we can live in his presence. Okay, so but let's be clear that this is talking about a prophecy where God will restore Israel. Okay. And by the way, we know that it's not 1947 because, again, notice that they will live in his presence. There are a lot of things that will happen that we will know that this happened. And 1947, none of this happened here. Israel is not following the Lord at all. The nation of Israel is not following the Lord at all. Verse 3, let us strive to know the Lord. His appearance is as sure as the day, his appearance is as sure as the dawn. He will come like the rain, like a spring showers that waters the land. What am I going to do with you, Ephraim? What am I going to do with you, Judah? Your loyalty is like a morning mist, like the early dew that vanishes. This is why I have used the prophets to cut them down. I have killed them with the words of my mouth. My judgments strike like lightning. I desire loyalty and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Now, this to me is worth exploring here. Let me see. I'm going to go back for a minute because I want to go back to another translation, see how this translates. I want to show you something, and the reason why I'm going to go through this here. I'm in chapter 6, and let me hurry up here. Verse 6, and then verse 6. Let me see if I can see it here. All right. Verse 6 says, for I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. I'm going to finish this off here and then to come back here. I'm going to come back to verse 6 because I want to talk about, there's something very important I want to talk about with that. So he said, verse 6, I desire loyalty, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. But they, like Adam, have violated the covenant. There they have betrayed me. Gilead is the city of evildoers, tracked by the bloody footprints. Kind of interesting that he mentioned Adam here. They violated the covenant. Like raiders who wait for an ambush for someone, and a band of priests of murderers on the road to Shechem. They commit atrocities. I have seen something horrible in the house of Israel. Ephraim, promiscuity is there. Israel is defiled. A harvest is also appointed for you, Judah. That would be a harvest of wrath. When I return my people from captivity. Now we'll come back to that. I want to go back to chapter 6. Right here, I desire loyalty and not sacrifice, not the knowledge of God rather than burnt offering. Now, the reason why I wanted to kind of highlight this is because Jesus used this, and he used the term mercy. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And the reason why he said that was he was rebuking the Israelites. And he was rebuking the Israelites, the Pharisees, who hypocritically always tried to say we're using the law. Remember, they were criticizing Jesus for not obeying the law of Moses, which he wasn't. What Jesus violated was their interpretation, their interpretations of the law, but he never broke the law. And so he would use this statement, but I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Now, if you knew what this meant. And the reason why I say that is because religious people, and that's not only the Pharisees, but every single denomination in Christianity, every single one of them. Christianity itself as a religion, violates what Jesus just said right here. That they fail to recognize that God desires mercy more than, you could say, sacrifices. Okay, and so here's the difference between religion and understanding the heart of God. Religions will only focus on their precepts. I'll give you an example. There is a Christian denomination that to them you have to be baptized in water, that is H2O, in order to be born again, in order to get into heaven. To them, God is, if you don't get that water washed over you, you're never going to get into heaven. And they don't care about any kind of circumstances. The thief on the cross, if you die in a plane crash, if you're in a house fire, right? If you're in a house fire, and this happens all the time, where people are third-degree burns, 90% of their bodies, and they're laying up in an ICU, the burn unit, right? How do you handle that? They don't care. You got to baptize them, because God is more interested in water baptism than anything else. Holiness people, the same thing. Holiness, Pentecostal holiness people. God is more interested that you live according to their brand of holiness. So the women can't wear jewelry, pants, makeup, and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's what God is more interested in. That you can always tell the contamination of a religious person, religious denomination. Christianity is just contaminated by religion. And they miss the heart of God, that God seeks mercy more than, and here he's talking about the law of Moses. And that's not, so religious people won't see it that way. Religious people are going to say, well, here are our precepts. And by the way, all of these precepts are usually made up by man. Even if you go back to the Pharisees, that the Pharisees made up their traditions. So, for example, when they said that Jesus violated the law because he healed a woman who had a issue of blood for 12 years. Pharisees didn't care about that. When Jesus healed the woman, right, demonstrating God's love and compassion, they said, well, there are 6 days in which man ought to be healed. Come on those and be healed, but not on the Sabbath day. Now, don't laugh at the Pharisees, because many Christians today think the same. That whatever the pet peeve is, that they think God is more interested in that. That, oh, you didn't dot my I here, or you didn't come to church on Sunday, you didn't tithe, you didn't. These are things preachers push, and they think if I do these things, this is more important than the mercy and compassion that God has shown through Jesus Christ. That's why that verse of scripture is so important, because Jesus quotes from that verse of scripture all the time. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.